Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Lisa Bennett, your host. I'm so glad you're here with me today. We have Julie Stegman as a guest. She is from Resurrection City Church that just hit their 5-year mark. Super exciting. They are in St. Paul, Minnesota. And it was such a beautiful conversation. She is a vibrant young leader who taught me so much just in our time together. I think it is going to be such a meaningful thing for you to be a part of. She talked about the way we build our conversations around freedom as we're ministering to our communities. That was mind-blowing to me and is such an important thing for you to wrestle with and think about, and maybe in a way that you have never really, I know for me it was revelatory, and for Gen Z and being a genuine part of our communities that gains a listening ear as opposed to coming in with quote unquote all the answers and steamrolling and things that can come across a bit flippant, especially to the younger generation and the future, the current, present of the church, as well as the future leaders who will carry on this work for decades to come and centuries to come. It is an important conversation, along with a million other just beautiful moments of what she's learned, what God is teaching her. You're going to love this conversation. I'm so excited for you to hear it. And let's jump in with Julie Stegman. Well, good morning, Julie. Welcome to the Plant Strong podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm really eager for our conversation. I have not had the chance to be with you much in person in real life. I think we've crossed at least one retreat in the past and maybe more than that. But I am really looking forward to our time together. You have been a highly recommended guest to pursue. And so I hope that encourages you. Those who have spent time with you have said, this is a no-brainer. And so I'm so excited that we're finally getting to chat. So I want to just set us up a little bit for kind of the direction we're going to go today. And then I'll get you to introduce yourself, because we just like to get to know, like, who's Julie, what makes Julie, not just church planner language, all the things. We like to get a little peek inside of who you are. And so, but first of all, I just kind of want to start off with a quote that I love. Zora, let's see, let me get the name right. Zora Neale Hurston says, there are years that ask questions and years that answer. And that has resonated for quite a few years with me. But as we have chatted back and forth, getting to know each other, you have shared with me some of the insights you feel you have been gaining over the past several years. You have had lots of swirling questions and often very few clear answers or resolutions to challenges you and have faced in your past. So I just believe so much that our listeners will find deep connection with your story, even as their circumstances may be very different. So I just, again, want to thank you so much for being with us today. We also were recording very close to some super exciting news that I'll have Julie share with us later, but I just think it's really cool how God aligns that kind of thing in ways that we couldn't even plan for. So to set the stage, why don't you fill us in on, like I said, some of what makes Julie, what brings you joy, what work fills your days, what is your home life like, as well as kind of a thumbnail sketch of what led you to church planning, which I know can feel like, how in the world do I do a thumbnail sketch? So just tell us just a brief little thing. It can be as long as you want it to be, but we love to see what the threads were that led you to church planting.
Yeah. Okay. So my husband and I planted Resurrection City Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where we live, in 2019. So Another exciting thing is that we just celebrated 5 years as a church last Sunday. So a lot of big things
What?
this week.
Yes.
And I co-pastor with my husband. So in terms of my role, it's a little bit of everything,
Yeah.
as church planners know.
Yes. Yes.
So preaching, organizing community groups, communications, all the things. And at home, we just adopted our daughter, who's 3 months
Ah,
now. So that's the exciting thing. The adoption was officially finalized just a couple of days ago. So
amazing.
yeah, big,
Amazing.
big milestone in our house.
Yeah.
And that's something we've been waiting for a long time. And so, yeah, she's definitely something that's bringing me a lot of joy right now.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
enjoying all the time with her.
That's amazing. So good. So good. So yeah, so what kind of how did you guys, what's your winding path? I'm assuming it's winding. Sometimes it's straight for people, but maybe it's winding. They landed you in church planting.
Yeah, no, I definitely never saw myself in ministry. That was never something I had considered when I was kind of growing up or in college. And then while I was in college, I had thought I wanted to be a teacher and then started to do some of the time in classrooms. And I realized I'm not sure this is the right fit for me and like how God's wired me and who I am. And so I ended up graduating with not like a super clear idea of what was going to be
Mhm.
next for me. And the church I was attending at the time had kind of a church based training program that you could participate in 1 year just to kind of grow, serve the church, learn, or you could do 3 years, which would kind of more train you for ministry in different ways. And so a mentor at the time had really kind of challenged me. She's like, I think this 1 year program would be really good for you. I could see you really thriving in it. And I was interested in it because I had seen people go through it and just the growth that had come out of it. But I was like, man, I don't know. I don't know exactly what I want to do next. And I don't know if this is going to help me get there.
Yeah.
And she just really challenged me with, yeah, you might, it might not help you get where you want to go, but is it going to help you become the person you want to be?
Mm.
Which was
Ooh.
convicting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was good though, because I was like, yeah, I think this is what I want to do. And then about halfway through that program, God just really gave me a love for church planning and an excitement about it, which is not
Wow.
something again that I'd ever really considered up until that point.
Yeah.
And then I met my husband in that program, and
Yeah.
he had actually moved to the Twin Cities area to kind of pursue church planting. And so we started dating shortly after. And after I had kind of decided, I think this is what I want to do, and then found
Mm.
out, like, oh, we both are kind of interested in this. I guess we'll see where this goes.
Right.
So it's kind of the path
Yeah.
that led there.
Amazing. Amazing. So how long was that? What year were you in that program? And then how does that connect to when you guys actually launched?
Yeah, so that was 2013, and then we launched in 2019. So
Okay. Yeah.
spent a lot of time just kind of trying to discern, like, is
Yeah.
this the right fit for us? We got married within there, and
Yeah.
spent some time working at that church that we trained
Okay.
at to get
Okay.
experience kind of
Great.
in ministry and learn
Yeah.
more of what that's like. And yeah, and
Yeah.
then launched 5 years ago. Just
Amazing.
crazy.
Yeah, it is. I love to hear that too. I love hearing that churches, stories of where churches it's almost like an incubator. I mean,
Mhm.
what better space? And I love when churches intentionally create spaces like that. That is that's so healthy. And we hear such great stories coming out of people that were then sent out of those spaces. It's just such a great way to set them up for thriving. I love it. I love it. That's great. Okay, so um there's this, kind of the topic we had talked about, the lure or the drug or the mirage of feeling like we are in control comes around quite frequently on this podcast because it comes around quite frequently in my life. So by extension, my guest and my community just hears about it a lot. But I think it is a common denominator among everyone. Like it is
Mhm.
just, it will be in different varying degrees, but this idea that so many of our modern struggles, I feel like, are sourced back to that, like this desire to have control or belief that we do have control. So many of our anxieties are connected to that. So as the world has become more and more advanced, we have been lulled into this belief that, like, if I can just find the correct process or the plan of action that, if executed properly, will guarantee smooth sailing and pain-free living. And most Christians would say that they don't believe that that's true, but our lives, man, I feel like I tell a different story often by the way, the fruit that I'm producing. And so also noted our utter and complete shock when things do not go as planned. That, to me,
Yes.
in my own life, has been the biggest revealer. I'm like, why am I so shocked that things turned into a dumpster fire? I mean, what in scripture teaches us any different, you know? And so,
Mm.
another quote that I've often shared is from my therapist from over a decade ago. And he's the brilliant Dr. John Walker. And he told me the key to emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental health is the ability to live with ambiguity. And I am just, I chew on that regularly, and have done so for over a decade. So basically, he was cutting to the chase and gently reminding me that more often than not, the answer is that there are no clear answers. And it is our work to do to figure out how to live in that tension. So that is what I would love for us to spend time on today. Um, Super fun topic for everybody to tune into, but I think it's going to resonate. And I know with what we've shared outside of the space that you resonate deeply with that. So let's unpack
Mhm.
what this has looked like practically in your life. I know there are some specific challenges that you've faced that seem to be stringing together years of no clear answers. So, you know, just church planning alone, if that's all we were talking about, that would be enough to deep dive. But you've had others. So what are some additional factors that you would be willing to share with us that have continued to bring this topic to the forefront for you?
Yeah, I had never heard that quote that you shared at the beginning. And I really resonate with that too, that there are definitely years of questions. Yeah, church planting, we planted in 2019. So, we got 1 year in and then the whole world fell apart. So, not at all
Ah,
how we expected our first few years to
no.
go. But the other two big things that have been a lot of years of no clear answers in my life. The first being my own health. And so,
Mm,
Lisa, I know you've shared about your challenges in the past and lately. And so I know you can relate to that.
mm,
For me, about 10 years ago, my body sort of started to go haywire. I had
mm,
all these different symptoms popping up in lots of different body systems. And I spent
mm,
about 5 years going to doctors and
mm.
just repeatedly being told, we don't really know. We're not sure.
Yeah.
And so it's just really hard to live with for a long time. Definitely had a toll on me, both physically and emotionally, just
And you
feeling
were so
like,
young. You're so
yeah,
young. Everybody's telling you, you're so young.
yeah, you shouldn't be feeling this way. Like
Right.
and I'm like, I know that that's not normal, but like it's my experience and I'm not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
And then I finally got a diagnosis in 2019, actually the year that we launched Resurrection City. Um, and that was great to finally understand like what was going on, but it also has led to a lot more questions because the conditions I have aren't super common, or at least not always commonly diagnosed, as you
Mhm.
can tell with my experience. And so there's not always a clear treatment path
Mm. Yeah.
for different things. And so
Yeah.
years of questions and answers kind of all rolled into one there.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that's kind of related was starting our family. So my husband and I will be married 9 years this year. And
Mm.
so if you think about that, 10 years of being sick is right around the time that we were engaged and got married. It's like, well,
Awesome.
for better or for
Awesome.
worse, here you go. Sorry about that. Um, And so naturally that kind of put a hold on some of our conversations
Sure.
about having kids when I
Yeah.
felt pretty terrible. And the idea of adding the symptoms of pregnancy on top of everything I was already experiencing sounded
Yeah.
pretty challenging.
Yeah.
Um, and then when I got my diagnosis, there are definitely some risks involved with pregnancy, both for mom
Mm-hmm.
and for baby,
Mm-hmm.
with some of the
Mm-hmm.
conditions I have. And so at that point, we had sort of come to terms with and made peace with the idea that we might not have biological children.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made the decision to move towards becoming foster parents. And so we did that for a couple of years. And through kind of a strange set of circumstances, there just really wasn't much of a need for foster parents in our county for
Wow.
kids age 0 to 5.
Yeah.
Um, it happened over kind of during COVID. And so a lot of people became foster parents, I think,
Okay.
because they
Yeah.
finally had the time to
Sure.
do all the paperwork and the training and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, with COVID, um, there was a lot less reporting happening
Mm.
because kids aren't in
Yeah.
childcare or seeing extended family and different things like that. So,
Right.
so we felt like, okay, this is where we thought we were supposed to move towards, and now nothing's really happening.
Fascinating.
And so
Yeah.
decided to move towards more traditional adoption. Um, and so that was about a year and a half ago. And then now, just finally, we've
Oh,
adopted our daughter. So
oh
yeah,
my
road to
goodness.
starting our family has been anything but clear.
Right, right. So through, I mean, that is significant. That is a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I go back to the young part. I have such personal experience of the different ways people approach having conversations, and they want to say things. They want to know, they just want to say words. And so when I had my cancer diagnosis, I was young for the specific cancer diagnosis I got. So
Mm.
I am not currently young for what I'm going through. So people are less bothered by it, but I can only imagine how this is supposed to be, again, this preconceived idea of what life's supposed to look like. And
Mm-hmm.
everything is falling apart from that. And just so hard to deal with the things people are saying. So, do you feel like, are you naturally a person that can kind of roll with ambiguity more naturally? Do you like things more laid out? How has that personally, have you experienced that part personally?
No, I'm not naturally a person. I don't know
You're
who
like,
does
indeed,
well with
no.
that. Yeah. I'm definitely like a planner, and more specifically like a long-term planner. Like
Okay.
I can
Yeah.
roll with the day-to-day a little bit more easily, but I have always liked to know a little bit more of like what the future holds. And so you can
Interesting.
imagine that was not I was not
Not
able to do
awesome.
that. Yeah. Um, and so yeah, I think God has grown me in that area by necessity over the
Yes.
last 10 years.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely not something that comes naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. I do find that's an interesting conversation because I am more naturally kind of a I'm not a long range planner, never have
Mm,
been. And so I'm a little more comfortable with I don't know long term, but I like to wrap up bows in the immediate. I'm like,
mhm,
if I can grind and get to an answer by like the end, by the weekend of at least something, like something to hold on to, then I'll be okay. And I in the past have used that language a lot. And I
mhm.
have found I don't I use the word, it has been beat out of me, not because I feel like God has like in some punitive way beat me on that. That's not what I mean, but I do feel like the onslaught just has continued to beat it out of me, for lack of a better term.
Mhm. Yes, I can relate
Yeah.
to that.
So as church planners, there's so much that just feels like it's constantly at stake. I don't like that language, and yet I can feel it sitting here as real and as tactile, and like I know that to my core what it feels like to have things at stake, like finances that you need to cover to keep your space, staff that might be with you that have maybe made huge sacrifices to be on your staff, and you're like, how am I going to pay them? Um, you want your church family to feel seen. So like you're wanting to be available. There's the actual real addictions and abuse and like large scale just damaging issues that you are asked to step into. It is just a lot. How have you seen God working in your heart in regard to finding him as your single source of peace? In other words, fighting against that narrative in your mind that says, once at the minimum, once I get this person touch base with, or once we get that financial marker met, then I can like breathe a little bit and be healthier in my practices. Man, how have you worked through that with God? Because the reality is for you, especially in this season, I'm thinking like almost nothing was getting checked off your list with clarity. I mean, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things, and I'm still definitely in process in
Yeah.
a lot of these areas.
Yeah.
But I think that acceptance of ambiguity has been really helpful, knowing that like there's not always a quick fix for everything.
Yeah.
And I may not know why something is happening, or, why, someone's leaving the church, or someone,
Yeah.
like all these
Yeah.
different things that can come up, like you mentioned. Um, and so getting more comfortable with the idea that I'm not in control of all those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I A book I read that I really loved about that topic was The Cost of Control by Sharon Hoddy Miller. And she differentiates between agency and control, which was just
Mm.
helpful language for me. So thinking about like, yeah, I may not be in control of these things. Like God is in control, and that's a good thing. It's better
Yeah.
than me being in control,
Yes.
but I do have agency in the situation. And
Mm.
so what can I do that is, within my agency, but is not kind of stepping over into that line of trying to be in control of something? Um,
It's
I
good.
am an Enneagram 2, so I tend to take on everyone's problems and emotions as my
Yes.
own if I'm not
Yes.
careful. And so, which, doesn't help anybody and ultimately just leads to burnout. So
Sure.
I've been working on that, but I think really remembering those things that like, yeah, these things are not within my control. I have things I can do, the out of
Mm-hmm.
response, like I have
Mm-hmm.
agency in this situation,
Yeah.
but the outcome is not something that I necessarily have control over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's been helpful for me, especially in like ministry shepherding situations,
Mm.
where again, like I said, I want to help people. I want to, and it's easy, I think, to want to jump to like quick fixes, or because you don't want to see people dealing with hard things. I
No.
understand that.
Yeah.
So really remembering that like Jesus is the ultimate shepherd, and basically just support staff in my role in what I
That's a
do.
great way to put it. Yeah.
And so just kind of trying to meditate on that. I've even started one of the things I've started to try to practice is praying Psalm 23 like for other
Mm.
people. So remembering that like,
Mm.
you know, the Lord is Lisa's shepherd. Like she lacks nothing. The Lord will guide her to green pastures and
That's
quiet waters.
good.
And just, I mean, some of it's like a prayer, and some of it's also just like trying to get truth into my own head. Like
Yeah.
I'm not in control of these things. Like God is the ultimate one who is shepherding these people. And I don't
That
know.
is
It's a challenge,
good.
but
That is really good. Um, so you mentioned a book, and that Heidi Tandy has referenced that book in
mm.
the past. She has big feelings about that book. So that's going to be a highly recommended for this episode. Um, so like for me, um, it really you tapped into something really important. It is a internal monologue. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have this loop, and I've really worked for the past few years in very intentionally trying to stop that in its tracks,
Mm-hmm.
and and literally like saying different words, saying the true thing. And I've shared before, I'm not a great journaler, but I do find that once I took the pressure off myself of journaling, like lists, like bullet lists and
Mm-hmm.
like a sentence or something. So is there something you talked about trying to get that truth in your head? Are there a couple? What does that look like? Does that look like your daily time with Jesus? Are you a journaler? Like, what is a really tangible thing you've done to try to do that?
Yeah, I think it helps me to have things that I can kind of like, repeat to myself. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
the cultural way of talking about it is like a mantra or whatever.
Right. Right.
But having those things to be able to like come back to has been
Yes.
helpful.
Yes.
And I have found that scripture memory, which I'm not great at, but when I do it, it is incredibly helpful to me to be able to like Psalm 23. That one was easy because I
Mm,
memorized it as a kid. And so
yeah.
it was like it was already coming to my mind. And I was like, okay, I can use this. Like I have
Yeah.
this in my heart and in my mind, and I can, rely on it. And so trying to do more of that. I tend to come
Good.
back to it when I really am like struggling with something, is coming back
Yeah.
to scripture memory. I wish I was more consistent even when
Yeah.
I am not.
Yeah. No,
But
that's
that's really been
great.
helpful for me.
That's great. Isn't it amazing? It stops me kind of in my tracks on the regular that I'm like, we've known this for forever. Like, this is
Mhm.
ancient wisdom that God told us. He gave us this gift. And I don't know. I think for some of us, my age, growing up in the big camp,
Mm,
spirit, like quiet time with Jesus, Christian camp, all like VBS, all the things, which were amazing, like amazing. But I think some of us, I don't know, there just seemed to be a trend that we kind of like, well, don't make sure it doesn't get like you have to do these a checklist. In other words,
yeah.
if you do it this way, you risk that it's going to become a checklist. And I'm like, I think we swung the pendulum too far because to a person recently, when I'm talking, having these conversations, they are saying prayer and scripture memorization. Or even if it's
Mm,
not scripture, it's not like you're you're looking to tell somebody, hey, I can quote these 5 verses. It's like the
right.
repetitive, it's the washing over our mind. And scripture, God told us that. That is the renewing of our
Mhm.
minds. That's like the magic thing. Like, and we just have I think maybe missed out on that. And I'm going to make a shameless plug for a future episode. We've got Betsy Spring coming back on the episode. And she and I have talked endlessly about this. And her
Mm,
life has been just completely molded and made beautiful because of these practices that we took for granted, those of us who grew up in the church. And I appreciate you sharing that. You did not, I didn't prompt you on that at
yeah.
all.
Yeah.
That was completely off the page. And I just am it gives me a warm sense of joy and peace to know God's
Mm,
just going, ladies, listen, this is it. This is it.
mhm.
That's beautiful. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, okay, so you've made reference to your sweet baby girl.
Mhm.
What a season this has been for you guys since you've had her. Like, obviously, what'd you say? You've had her for a year? Have you had her for a year?
Well, only three
No,
months. Yeah.
three
So she
months,
was
only three
born,
months.
yeah,
Okay,
about
she's
three
only three
months
months
ago.
old. Okay,
Hmm.
so you are a church that's not even 5 years old yet. You hit that marker, and then having a baby, all these big things, and a lot of emotion. What are some learnings you believe God has gifted to you in this time? Because He always meets us exactly where we are. And
Hmm.
I just, as a mom, I'm just thinking the incredible emotion surging all the time of nurturing a young church and having finally this baby that you have prayed for. So, are there a few things that you feel like God has just really lovingly revealed to you in this season?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like in some ways I'll be processing this probably for a
Yeah.
while, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely think this is going to be one of those things that I'll look back on as like a big moment of God's faithfulness in my life.
Wow.
And I think it's helpful to, at least for me, to kind of mark those moments, because I know I'll be in seasons in the future where
Yeah.
it's again more years of questions than of answers. And so
Yeah.
to be able to look back on it, and you know, that's not to say that it's like I get irritated sometimes, and I know it's best intentions, but when people say like, you know, people would tell me during the process like, oh, it'll all be, you know, so worth it. It won't even, you
Mm.
know, all of the years of like, you know, not knowing will be like nothing once you're there. And on one hand, like, was it worth it? Like, yes, of course, you know, like to have her is makes it 100% worth it, but that doesn't make it any less hard.
Mm.
Like I had
Wow.
some people be like, you know, you'll look back and feel like those years were, I don't know, you'd almost look back positively on them. And I'm like, I will not.
No,
They were
not
hard.
true. Not true.
No. And I don't think we need to like erase that. I think we can
Mm.
hold both things, that like it is a big moment of God's faithfulness. And I'll always look back to that. And
Mm.
the road was really hard to get there too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
but I
appreciate you
think,
saying that because I don't, that is a common thing to slap that bumper sticker on the whole thing and wrap
mm,
it up and it's because everybody wants to be done with it.
yeah.
They want to be done with it, they don't want to be
Uh-huh.
done with it as more than we do, but it is really that desire for that equilibrium to balance back out. And I'm I'm like you. It makes me crazy. You're sounding way more gracious than I am. I typically unleash and go, I've been doing this for 50 years. We're not going to skate past this one.
Yes. Yeah, I've definitely had my moments where I've
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
that very strongly.
Yeah.
And so it's tough, you know, I can look and see, you know, I believe strongly that God doesn't waste pain. You know, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's for me a way of thinking about it that doesn't try to erase it, but it's
Yes.
like God will do something good out of it. I, I don't know if you've heard or seen that it's like a Japanese art. They call it kintsugi, I think is the name. I could be mispronouncing that.
Girl. I am so obnoxious about that. I
Oh, good.
Yes, yes. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. It's like this pottery where they make it and then they actually break it and put it back together with gold, like sealing the seams of it with gold. And that's, I think, a helpful image for me. It's like, yeah, God doesn't waste it. God does good things through it. But,
Mm,
you know, that's still, you can still see the cracks. They're still there.
that's
They're
right.
still,
That's right.
so I do think though through it, it really, that whole season really made me wrestle with my identity and my calling
Mm,
in a way that I
mm,
think hopefully will be helpful to me in the future.
yeah.
You know, I really had to wrestle with like, okay, if we never have kids, is God still good? And obviously the
Yeah.
answer is yes. And I think that helps put things into perspective a little bit, I hope, in the future when things
Right.
are challenging, and as I'm sure they will be in parenting.
Sure.
And I think it also allowed me to wrestle with like, you know, I really felt called to like be a mom. It's something that I felt like God's given me the gifts and the skills that I think, you know, the desire to like nurture and care for people. And
Mhm.
um, I really wrestled with like, why would you give me that if this isn't
Mm,
happening? And I think he really revealed like, you know, you can still do those things in other ways. And that's just as important. Like spiritual
mhm.
mothering is
Oh,
just as
good.
important. And
Good.
like this is part of your calling too. And I hope that that'll be helpful to me in the future, like to remember that my identity is not just tied to my
Yes.
family or my
Yes.
role there, because obviously, you know, that's not a forever thing. Kids grow up,
That's right.
and but just to
They
remember
do.
that like God's given me a calling that I can live out in a lot of different ways. And if things with the church changed or I couldn't be in that role anymore, like
Mhm.
you know, I still have this calling, and he might in different seasons have me live it out in different ways. And so yeah, I think that's definitely something I've wrestled with, and it's made me so much more aware of like other people's experiences too, you know,
Yeah.
what it's like to be in a room of everybody talking about their kids when that's something you deeply desire but don't have. And so
Mm,
I feel like it's um I feel like I'm often now finding myself in situations where that's the case. And I'm like, okay, how can I include this person or change the subject? Because I
Oh,
know what it's like to be
good.
that person and to
Mm,
be like, I don't know, not a part of the conversation. So
yeah.
yeah, it's still processing,
Yeah.
but those are some
Of
of the things that come
course.
to mind.
Of course. Yeah. It's so good. It's that compassion piece. Again, I would love a million other ways to gain it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something God set out and went, you need more compassion. And so
Hmm.
that is, I believe that's a lie from the pit of hell. I don't think that God knows what God knows. I'm not saying that. He can do whatever he chooses, but this blanket statement that God is teaching you this lesson because of the
Hmm.
pain, that indicates that it's intentional. And I do not think that is always the case at all, at all. In fact, I
Yeah.
would say it would much more rarely be a situation where it's like that. And he can certainly do it whenever he chooses because he's sovereign and knows best. But we live in a trashed world. Like it's just there's
Hmm.
brokenness and disease and hard things. And so that we think that we will escape all of that is really a foolish perspective. And so to be able to, like you said earlier, you talked about holding the tension of
Hmm.
both, holding both things. That is just wow. It's so big. It's so important. So there's there's just so much richness in everything you shared today, and you may have already answered this question um satisfactorily toward what you think God is prompting you to say, but I just keep going back because I feel it so deeply. The chronic illness aspect of what you've experienced in your life and service in the kingdom and specifically church planning.
Hmm.
Wow, the energy levels and the energy reserves and all the things. I mean, there to me, there's no one better to speak on it because everyone in this uh, ministry space knows the battle of energy,
Hmm.
figuring out how to thrive and be present with your people, not neglecting those that are God has called you to love first. There's just so much to it. And then when you slap a chronic illness on top of it, so if there's anyone that can speak to seeking God for the source of your discernment of what to do, it's you. And not to put any, excess pressure on, but is there anything else that as we're kind of wrapping things up today that you feel like God just wants you to share with the community? Because again, there are varying levels of it, but you've seen probably one of the most extensive levels. And so all of our listeners, even if they have no experience with chronic illness or some of these things you've talked about, they have other factors in their life that is making them be able to very much identify. So do you feel like you shared what God had laid on your hearts or anything you want to kind of wrap us up with today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think that when you live with chronic pain and chronic issues of any kind,
Yeah.
you understand the deep brokenness of the world in
Mm,
a way that you can know intellectually, but you don't
mm,
necessarily always maybe think about.
mhm,
But when your own body is falling apart, you carry around this like felt need for eternity in a way that,
mm.
I just didn't before. I
Yeah.
just, the longing for God to come and make all things new, like people and their
Mm,
hearts, obviously, but also like our world and our bodies and, just all of the
mm.
hard things that are true because of sin and because of brokenness in our world. And
Yeah.
so, and I think that that's important for us as people in ministry to understand because, like you said, so many people are dealing with things that are chronic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the church has often, again, not necessarily intentionally bad way, but just sort of focused on like the quicker fix, the like, okay, I
Yeah.
want to help you find freedom in this area, or I want to help you like,
Mm,
you know, grow in this area. And so we really put out like more bite-sized things, like you can,
mm.
just do this and you'll, experience growth in this way, or find freedom from this sin that you're dealing with, or whatever it is. And it's, I think an understanding that it's not that easy is really something that people like want to feel understood about. I think
Yes.
especially about like Gen Z and just younger people in general, and the levels of like chronic mental health that they're
Mm,
experiencing or thinking about or dealing with. And I think in my conversations with them, it seems like they're often turned off by the church and how the church has like talked about it or acted like, oh yeah, you can just fix this by believing. And I
mm.
think they really feel misunderstood in that. And so I think, whatever the chronic thing is, but I think mental health is going to be a big one coming up. Just like being able to understand that deep level of brokenness, and that's not always going to be an easy fix. Not that God can't do those things, and I
Right.
think He will, and He does, and I
Yeah.
pray for that regularly. And I think
Right.
we need to believe that, but not to, at the same time, to still like honor the experience that they're having of like, this is chronic. Like this is something I've been dealing with for a long time, and it's a possibility that I might always deal with this. And so, how do I like
Yeah.
seek God even with that, and how do I believe that He is good and believe that He, cares for me and that He is going to make all things new? I think it's
Yeah.
just really important for us.
That is powerful, Julie. You just made me tear up and like my hair stand on my arms. What a important thing that I want us to pause on. That language of freedom. We may have really done some hurtful things. I mean, I've got a 20 and a 22-year-old who are just in the thick of it, and their
Mm-hmm.
peers, their communities, in some ways are so inspirational in their ability to talk through things and be honest. I am blown away.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am inspired every day by them and their friends of how willing they are to go there with vulnerability. But that is an important, the way you phrase that. I have never thought of it quite like that before. That I knew I knew what the grind is like, because they sniff out shiny, slick, prepackaged like that. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to have anything to do with it. And I'm realizing that probably the past 15 years of church has been a lot of freedom conversations, and which is all
Mm-hmm.
true. I mean,
Yeah, it's still
somebody's gonna
good.
be pushing back and going,
Yeah.
but scripture says, and I'm like, oh, I am God. He is the only
Mm-hmm.
place to find freedom. But the addictions and the
Mm-hmm.
mental health challenges do not go away overnight. Usually they can.
Yeah.
God can do
Right.
whatever he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
But the world that we are living in, it's real. And that
Mm-hmm.
is powerful. I really appreciate you articulating that so clearly. And it's so evident in the way you even present it, that you're saying it from a place of linking arms with the people in your community there. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's evident that you are speaking from a place of you're walking alongside as you are walking through it. I mean, you're hurting,
Mm-hmm.
you're struggling, you're having days where you don't want to get out of bed, and on some days you
Mm-hmm.
can't. And it just makes us realize we've got to stop with the easy fix. We
Mm-hmm.
just have to, or we're going to lose our voices in our communities presenting a Jesus that's not the Jesus. That isn't Jesus, is the quick easy
Yeah.
fix. That there's nothing about him that says that's who he is.
No,
And
he literally
so
had to die in order, like, that is not an easy fix. Like, what he did for us is not something that was
mm-mm,
light and breezy, like,
no,
he had to
no.
sacrifice a lot. And I think, you know, that's what we're called to do as we follow him, is to kind of have that same mindset.
Yeah. And being with each other in our sufferings, there's still
Mm-hmm.
joy. There's still joy. Like there's still
Yes.
celebration, but we've got to stop thinking that it's got to be either or, or
Yes.
like it's getting to the other side of this thing so that we can celebrate. We better learn
Mm-hmm.
to celebrate in the middle of it,
Yes.
because it's never going to
Otherwise, we'll
be,
never celebrate.
yeah, we're never going to do it. It's never going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. I love
Oh,
Kate Bowler, the author, but I love her motto that like life is so beautiful, life is so hard. And it's like, yeah, those, not only is it okay to feel that way, but like you're saying, like those things have to coexist. Because if we really believe the world, like as according to scripture, like both have to be true. We live in a broken world, and we have Jesus, and we have hope, and that is something for celebration and joy.
that's it, Julie. There's no better way to end this conversation. You have just brought so much joy and goodness to this time today. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Plant Strong podcast. Plant Strong is part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great podcasts and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.